Anyone familiar with the immersive sim genre has probably at least heard of the Thief series. It was once a big name among its immersive sim brethren, as the first two games of the series were developed by the one and only Looking Glass Studios, those behind System Shock, though the series would struggle when being passed down through different development studios after the closure of Looking Glass. Now the series sits in a dormant state since its 2014 reboot released to lukewarm reception, where its memory is carried on by video essayists and retrospective videos, which is what I intend to do. While I can only personally vouch for the appraisal of one of these games at the time of making this, both the first two titles are remembered as classics for a reason. Thief: The Dark Project was the name of the game that kickstarted this series, though it would be re-released a year later as Thief Gold, a definitive version of the Dark Project that adds various enhancements to the original, including 3 brand new missions. To put it as bluntly and as straightforward as possible, the game is awesome. To give that statement a bit more nuance, Thief Gold is one of the most intriguing and rewarding stealth experiences I've played. Even with zero nostalgia attached, only playing this game for the first time last year, and despite some of its more finicky systems, I believe it still holds up thanks to the richness in its mechanics and the open-ended and imaginative level design. Its world revels in its fascinating blend of steampunk and dark fantasy, with how it presents its own engrossing folklore, settings, and characters. There's a lot I love about this game, so I hope this video can explain some of the reasons why it's a remarkable game for both the stealth and immersive sim genres. I think a series with a name as simple as Thief would give one expectations for what you're getting into, and you'd essentially be right in this case. You play as a thief named Garrett, taking on assignments to steal valuable loot from various different locations. No matter from who or what you're stealing from, at the end of the day, what matters most is making it out with the treasure in one piece, creating as little commotion as possible. Garrett, and by extension the player, really has no need to care for the world around them, as a job done is a job done, and money is money. That said, this leaves the lore in an interesting position, where it's often left to be read as flavor text on the side, a little gaming buzzword we like to call environmental storytelling. This in and of itself is practically a staple of the immersive sim genre, but I think it's more or less the contrast with you having such a straightforward goal, making a simple yet debatably unethical living, that makes this concept so interesting to me, as if everything you read about with regards to experiments in ancient magic and undead are a part of something far bigger that you just so happen to be caught up in. But I'll save specifics for a later part in this video. Even still, many of the readings dispersed throughout the map serve not only as context to a greater picture, but also to give you immediate clues in your mission. Many times notes refer to which areas may be heavily guarded, or specific locations where important keys could be kept that are required to access certain items in your assignment's completion criteria. In a way, it feels like you're responsible for gathering intel you don't initially have as you go about your mission, which I believe adds heaps to the immersion factor. Even the maps you get for each level are incredibly crude and basic on purpose, since it's realistically what Garrett would know about the locations as an outside party, rather than creating a pinpoint minimap to track your every movement. You may want to take this praise with a grain of salt, as this is coming from a guy who absolutely loved Hollow Knight's map system, where it didn't automatically update as you explore an area until resting on a bench. But this level of just relying on your own exploration instincts and learning to understand an area's structure for yourself gives me an unparalleled joy like no other. Thief Gold wastes no time holding your hand, since its mechanics are relatively self-explanatory and satisfying to figure out yourself. There is a tutorial that gives you a solid rundown of the basics and controls, but a lot of your adapting to level-specific situations must be done on the fly, and sometimes you may pick up an item in the middle of a mission, in which you must just use context clues and intuition to figure out how it works. Both sight and sound play a significant part in how you interact with the world around you, with sound itself being incredibly apparent with how much noise a specific action is making.
I feel like we're being followed. Nothing to be seen now.
Just the wind, I guess. heard someone back there.
Yay. Who comes unto me?
And while it would be a lot more complicated to nail down how well enemies would be able to see you from their perspective, given they have no visible sight lines, Thief simplifies this process by giving you a meter on your HUD that displays how visible you are at all times. I love this meter, as because of it, I never had any of those "no way he saw me, that's bullshit" moments that typically plague other stealth moments in games, since it's always apparent when I should be noticed. And even if the meter is still dark as I'm caught, my failure could be attributed to me making too much noise, or just being in a bad position and bumping into an enemy. It's such a simple solution to what can feel like finicky or poorly conveyed enemy sightlines that I'm almost shocked I don't see mechanics like this in more games, but it works excellently here, and really lends itself to the legitimacy of your actions, and allows you to make more ballsy moves if you have the skill to pull it off. Thieving in Thief Gold is practically an art form in and of itself, and has so many interesting complexities and quirks that can make it feel like a lot when all lied out in front of you, but comes so intuitively through gameplay that it feels like second nature. As such, it creates for a compelling gameplay loop that I never grew tired of by the end, and was consistently built upon out of the gate. Now, with a profession as sophisticated as thievery, one would come to understand that their own assortment of gadgets and tools would largely influence how the mission would play out. No one is breaking in and out of Epstein Island with their bare fists and living to tell the tale. For the most part, though, we're not quite in the age of remote-controlled drones and car bombs, so we'll have to rely on medieval times' most advanced technology, like a low-poly blackjack and magic harnessed within arrows to get the job done. Flash bombs are okay though, I guess. The blackjack is probably the most preferable weapon to use in most instances where you can, since it's an unlimited resource and a clean strike towards the back of an enemy allows for an easy blackout. The sword is mainly there as a backup in case things get dicey and you need to deal damage, though this will often be the very last resort since melee combat is not good, where enemy hitboxes only sometimes work the way you'd expect. Like a lot of things in Thief, I think it's the thrill of the hunt, everything that surrounds your encounters with these enemies, that makes it so engaging, where your gadgets and the environment come into play to set up the perfect moment to knock out an enemy. Elemental arrows are definitely a huge catalyst for setting up these engagements, and I find it interesting that only the fire and standard arrows are directly used for dealing damage from afar. Don't worry guys, stealth archer build lives on after all. What I like about each of these arrows is that they have so many uses that can almost seem benign at first, but can be an invaluable advantage when used properly. Take the water arrow. These are initially introduced as a tool to put out torches, already an excellent purpose since torches are everywhere, and putting them out means there are more shadows to hide in. Medieval times, not everyone can afford electricity. I get it. It's later found out that you can imbue these arrows with holy water to permanently kill undead enemies, something that's impossible to do with normal weapons. And something I never knew until researching this video is that water arrows can be used to clean up enemy blood puddles, which helps you cover your tracks to keep other enemies from picking up on your presence so quickly. While fire arrows are great for directly damaging enemies, they are also used to set off all sorts of explosive materials from a distance for kills or distractions, and can even relight torches in any case you want to light up an area to help you see your surroundings better. Even arrows that aren't as multifaceted as the water or fire arrows are still flexible enough to feel like they can help in many situations. Despite the limitation of rope arrows only sticking to earthen and wooden surfaces, the potential for rerouting and even skipping major sections of a map cannot be understated with how many of these surfaces do appear throughout the game. Moss arrows are the go-to solution to dealing with any noise complaints you have with the flooring in Garrett's shoes, but must be used conservatively in case you run out when you really need it. And while rare and expensive, gas arrows are great for performing speedy knockouts a la the blackjack from a distance. It's only a shame their most abundant use is in the very last mission, where the game really lets you go ham and put lizard creatures to sleep. I promise that makes a tiny bit of sense if you play the game. Thief Gold, above all else with its tools and gadgets, leans heavily on resource management. It's not so much just that you know how to use each item to your advantage, but also that you know when you should use each item to make sure you have enough for potential situations later in the mission. And it's not as cut and dry where running out of one thing will automatically guarantee you can't complete the mission. You may just have a tougher time with something that could have largely been counteracted with the right item. This is an aspect I imagine I'll view differently going back to replay this game, when I will now know what's coming in each mission as opposed to playing blindly. But the amount of different things that could be done with each item, and how you choose to go about the mission, is something that lends its way to near endless possibilities for replayability. Like with a lot of immersive sims, the level design is very labyrinthian and non-linear in nature due to, as the genre's name suggests, the idea of immersing you in exploring a real place within a virtual world. Real places aren't typically that linear. Thief Gold retains this philosophy for most of the campaign, with many alternative paths and routes that can be taken and explored, on top of creative usage of the aforementioned gadgets. The very first mission, taking place in Lord Bafford's Mannor, cleverly eases the player into the game, while also not feeling restrained from letting them run loose later on. The streets you start out on are safe and allow you to overhear conversing guards for intel, and have a network of sewers perfect for hiding bodies if you accidentally kill someone. The guard holding the main key to the Mannor is drunk, so you can do just about anything in front of him while getting the key, and then you'll enter the Mannor itself, where you'll pretty much have free reign to snoop around and gather the treasures you're after. The place is crawling with guards though, so you'll still have to stay sneaky and hide in the shadows when needed. You'll even get a taste of various different types of flooring to learn how much noise your footsteps make on each surface. The next mission, Break from Cragscleft Prison, has many claustrophobic mining tunnels where you'll have to find other paths to slip past enemies since space to roam is so limited. On top of the human hammerites patrolling the mines, you'll find undead that can only be knocked out briefly before getting right back up. Luckily, hints towards blessing your arrows with holy water to permanently put down the undead are given to you via the texts you can pick up early in the level, so you do just that when you find bottles of holy water when infiltrating the Hammerites factory to take out all the previously encountered undead on your escape, so long as you shoot them twice, which I didn't figure out until the next level. Lastly, you'll run into metal flooring in the factory, which is the loudest surface in the game, meaning clever use of the moss arrows is a must if you want to move anywhere on it with enemies around. Down in the Bonehoard exclusively features non-human enemies, whether they be undead or these strange dinosaur creatures, alongside a lot of drops and booby traps. Not only is this place a maze, but it's an open maze where you can look at any other ledge no matter how much you ascend or descend, really selling the scope of this gigantic tomb. The constant reverberating of the horn in the background only adds to the bone-chilling atmosphere down here. Assassins starts out with the only trailing mission in this entire game that's much more engaging than it sounds, considering the different surfaces you must account for sneaking through, trying to simultaneously not get noticed by the assassins you're trailing, while also not falling too far behind. The rest of the mission plays similarly to Lord Bafford's Mannor, just with the use of some mechanics you've learned since. Thieves Guild is the first of the new levels added to Thief Gold that wasn't originally in the Dark Project, and it's probably the weakest level in the game. There is a bit of an interesting dynamic with the amount of unarmed civilians you're not allowed to kill, which will alert the other guards if you're spotted, but everything about the layout was so bland and samey, on top of being maze-like, that I felt like I was running around like a fucking monkey half the time. The sword is interesting, in that it starts out as a playground of gardens, waterways, and guards, yet slowly descends into complete insanity as you scale the mansion and run into shit that just shouldn't be like that. Even if the enemies and guards can be dealt with similarly to in previous levels, it really is the surreal terrain that drives the exploration in the latter half of the mission. There's just so many strange sights and sounds from one room to the next. It's a really unique experience like no other. Definitely one of my favorite missions in the game. The Haunted Cathedral is another mission that kicks the paranormal activity up a notch, with new varieties of undead forces as you explore a trashed and abandoned city block. With the objective of looting a Hammerite cathedral, you end up realizing you can't even enter until much later in the game, meaning your main mission goes incomplete your first time around. The next 4 missions deal with locating the talismans needed to open the temple's sealed doors, and largely feel a lot more self-contained mechanically, with gimmicks that don't come up again, since a lot of the basics the game builds upon from here on out have already been established. The Mage Towers, another mission added in Thief Gold, is a relatively lengthy mission, with different towers and themes corresponding to their particular elements, and features these mage enemies new to Thief Gold, with great voice lines.
Wind blows, fire burns, earth shakes, water flows. Your fate is a hurricane that cannot be outrun.
The Lost City is constructed of buildings with automatic light systems that trigger if any entity resides in the room, though can be evaded via standing in the archways, as long as an enemy doesn't light up an adjacent room and expose your cover. There are also these fire guardians with deadly ranged attacks that can be snuffed out with your water arrows, and a massive jump at the end that took me like 80 tries to make. Pretty sure this wasn't the intended method, but I made it work. Song of the Caverns, the last of the new levels added to Thief Gold, seemingly progresses quickly at first when exploring the caves, but turns into an opera house raid when you realize the guy that your guy knew couldn't do his job. It's a huge map, and the main thing you'll have to worry about is the sheer abundance of people patrolling the golden halls, though the heavy use of carpeted flooring, particularly on upper levels of the house, make chances for stealth blows from behind plentiful. The last of these missions in your talisman gathering quest, aptly titled Undercover, gives you the privilege of being able to show yourself to the enemy without automatically getting caught. The difficulties arise when you have to find opportune moments to progress your mission without the guards noticing, to avoid giving yourself away as an outside party. Considering it's a well-lit map with very few hiding places, a lot of your strategy should be focused on understanding the paths the guards will take and trying to pick them off when no one else will witness it. Now, there are 4 more missions in the game with their own mechanics, but I feel these are best discussed alongside the story context for each mission, so I'll save these for the next section. The main point I really want to hammer in is how each level of the game is completely different. Sure, there are mechanics and reoccurring themes that are built upon in later levels, a la any video game with consistency, but even just briefly overviewing what each level had to offer highlights how much thought went into treating every mission as its own entity with its own goal and story to tell. Aside from maybe a few moments of wandering some dull, samey hallways that were present in a few missions, I was amazed that I could recall almost everything unique about each level with complete clarity as to what level it belonged to. They all had such distinct personality and theming that kept them from blending together. Before I go further, I would like to warn you that there will be spoilers for Thief Gold from here on out. Though I won't be covering every piece of lore, I feel it's worth highlighting the key events that change your goals throughout the course of the game. As I stated before, Garrett is a relatively simple man who makes a living performing unsanitary jobs for a decent profit. We're only given very brief backstory as to how Garrett was trained under a mysterious group known as the Keepers, allowing him to acquire stealth skills before breaking away from the Keepers for unknown reasons. Garrett's jobs at first are just daily routine until he almost gets his head cut off for not paying his taxes. So he goes out to embarrass the guy who hired the assassins on him by stealing his prized fire stick. This act of bravery captures the attention of a woman named Viktoria, who then commissions him to steal a sword from a manor belonging to a man named Constantine. After the sword is retrieved from the aptly named mission, it's revealed that Constantine himself was working with Viktoria and commissioned to steal his own sword, to test Garrett's abilities to see if he could steal the real treasure he's after, the Eye. This serves as Garrett's biggest task in that the Hammerite Cathedral containing the Eye is sealed, requiring the 4 talismans to break. After going on your little adventures to acquire the 4 elemental talismans, you'll return to the Cathedral in the aptly named Return to the Cathedral mission, and things don't go as smoothly as planned. You're able to take the Eye pretty quickly, but the actual process of leaving the Cathedral becomes a lot more complicated when the doors are resealed and all the haunts, essentially reanimated corpses of Hammerites, draw their attention to Garrett. The haunts are some of the fastest, toughest, and most aggressive enemies in the game, and are made all the more terrifying by their distorted, whispered chanting. The cathedral grounds are crawling with all sorts of undead, and your only hope of escape is following the orders of the apparition of Brother Murus in order to complete his burial rite to let him and his brothers rest in peace. There's a fair bit of backtracking required to complete these tasks, but the map is relatively small with well-marked buildings and facilities, so it's hard to get lost. The puzzles are also some of the most involved and clever in the game, and it constantly feels like you're being hunted down throughout the entire level, where no square foot is safe, which makes for one of the most intense yet most satisfying experiences out there. Let me tell you, there's nothing like trudging around with a body you ripped from the attic, realizing that you are not outrunning anything that takes notice to you. Every trek from one building to the next feels as if it could easily be your last, and you're under constant pressure to multitask in such a heavily guarded place, where combat is such a limited option. After Garrett reads a prayer when he clearly has other concerns,
O Master Builder, we ask thee to bless our brother who hath died in thy service. Forgive him the transgressions of his living days.
And gathers other valuable holy items to obtain a key. What else can he do but steal a high-power explosive charge from the attic and fucking obliterate the back gate to finally leave the cathedral? A pretty wild send-off to one of my favorite levels in any game, really encapsulating some of the best parts about Thief Gold's stealth and atmosphere, on top of adding a twist that really embraces its element of horror. It's definitely got its campiness with the voice acting.
I need to find a candle I used when I was still alive. The last time I remember using a candle is the night of my death.
And the game's goofy, low-poly character models, but the experience was incredibly endearing and memorable all the same. After escaping with the Eye and giving it to Constantine, Constantine reveals himself to be the Trickster, a fabled being that has been referenced in multiple texts throughout the game, with Viktoria being his consort. He ends up pulling out one of Garrett's eyes, where Garrett can only stand and watch in absolute horror, as Constantine uses Garrett's eye to activate the Eye gemstone, which he plans to use to open a rift between his realm and that of the mortals. So yeah, like, typical biblical shit, like, bring the hell to you. Nice service. The last few missions, starting with Escape, really highlight the complete madness that the trickster plans to spread to the world, featuring all new bizarre creatures and surreal landscapes that reflect those found earlier in Constantine's mansion. Escape essentially has you leaving Constantine's mansion through underground tunnels you haven't explored before, and features these annoying green bastards that explode when you kill them, so you have to waste precious arrows to kill them from a distance and not take damage. Strange Bedfellows is more or less exploring the ruins of the Hammerite temple you infiltrated in the mission Undercover, and receiving a trapped fake eye that Garrett plans to swap with the real eye in the trickster's ritual. The final mission, Into the Maw of Chaos, is relatively linear and not too difficult with the tools you are given to dispose of enemies, including those handy gas arrows to put the lizard people to sleep, but is thematically a really fascinating level for how you spend it quite literally descending into madness, as the terrain gets more and more warped as you slide down into hell, gradually approaching the trickster. The final kill of the trickster is pretty anticlimactic, to be honest, but it sets up an ending where Garrett says he's completely done thieving after all that shit. Until next game, and here's one of the hardest title drops in history.
The trickster is dead. Beware the dawn of the Metal Age.
To say Thief Gold's story is very straightforward and to the point is a massive understatement, though I think for what kind of game it's trying to be, the flavor text that exists on the side solely to give you more context to the world around you is enough for the game to achieve its purpose of at least piquing your curiosity. Even Garrett struck me as a particularly interesting protagonist, as he stays relatively quiet most of the time for the player to really put themselves in his shoes, though never commits for the fully silent protagonist approach, since he occasionally makes remarks that really bring out his personality and wit. It's a bit of a mix between the styles of having a character constantly commentate and having a character completely mute that I think works really well, considering thieves shouldn't be super talkative on the job, but are also human and will react accordingly when the time allows them to. It's really a classic tale of good versus evil, with all the biblical shenanigans and multiple factions at play to never allow the conflicts or location variety to stagnate. Even the twist with Constantine, despite being pretty well foreshadowed through his mansion's hellish layout, could fall under someone's radar with how many bizarre concepts exist in this world, as they assume this is just a normal occurrence, possibly explained in a text they haven't read yet. What's to say what's too abnormal about a devil disguised as an old man, when this world is already full of magic and unholy abominations? The uncertainty is all part of the fun of diving into a new world. I think when discussing a game that's as old as this, with a gameplay engine that has aged far from perfectly, that it must be prefaced that it won't be everyone's cup of tea, since people have different levels of patience and tolerance for different flaws. I think one thing that is truly timeless, though, is the pure design of something, even when standards for design change, such as things being typically a lot less obtuse in modern gaming. I think it's hard not to respect an old game like Thief Gold for all the risks it takes in its level design and how it attempted to convey such an intricate idea of stealth despite all the shortcomings of the technology at the time. As is, it's far from a perfect game, but it's one I ultimately found very interesting to learn from. As for how well the stealth is implemented when so many modern games don't flesh it out to this degree, immersive sims are still going strongly, but I'm glad I decided to play a game as nuanced, creative, and as brilliant as Thief Gold.